On this episode of the Burnzo Cast, we have a nod to the Nintendo 64.
It's me, Burnzo. Ho 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 ho. Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 6 of the Burnzo Cast. This is your host, Matt Burns, speaking. I don't have too much news or too many announcements to get into before we get into this episode of the podcast. This is going to be a fun podcast. Last episode was fun, but it was about writing, so we're going to do a fun one this time. This episode is about a video game system that is very near and dear to my heart. It is not the greatest video game system ever made, and it's definitely not the greatest video game system made by its manufacturer, the Nintendo. But it's definitely a video game system that is very special to me. So I'm going to tell you why it's special to me. But before we get into that, here is a very quick message from our sponsor. Oh, hey, what's up, Poindexter? What are you up to?
Well, hello there, Harry. I'm playing with my chemistry set.
What gives, man? A year ago you were dumb as rocks, and now you're a genius. What's your secret, Poindexter?
Everything changed when I read a book by Matt Burns. Did you know his books are on Amazon.com now? Many of them cost only 99 cents. At most, you're only going to pay about $3. All I did was read one book by Matt Burns, and my IQ skyrocketed to 100 points.
Wow. Well, I may not be a genius myself, but I am smart enough to know that I better go out right now and get myself a book by Matt Burns. All right, everybody, welcome back to episode number 6 of the Burnzo Cast. This episode is called A Nod to the Nintendo 64. And here we go with the podcast. Okay, so I want to take you back to the year 1997. And it was the fall of 1997, and I was over at my friend Adrian's house. And he showed me this new video game that had just come out called Goldeneye 007, and I will henceforth refer to this game as Bond because that's what I call it now. But he showed me Bond, aka Goldeneye, and I was basically blown away by this game. I remember specifically him showing me, I think, the very first mission of the game called The Dam, where you have a silent PP-7 and you take out a couple of Soviet guards, and then you go up into a patrol tower and you get this weapon called the sniper rifle. You break out that sniper rifle and you aim in really close to one of the Soviet soldiers. You take him out with a headshot, and that's basically when I fell in love. I mean, it sounds a little sick, but that's basically when I fell in love with the game GoldenEye 007, or at least I was blown away by this game. Then Adrian showed me maybe a couple other missions, maybe the facility, especially the opening sequence where you crawl through a vent and then drop down into the restroom and take out a few guards in that restroom. But I know for a fact that he also showed me the frigate mission, which was the one that takes place on the boat. You go on that boat as Bond and you save a bunch of hostages. But you also get this awesome gun called the Phantom, and you actually can get the double Phantom, which is 2 different Phantoms, one for each arm. And you just actually destroy everything in your path with that gun, and it is very fun. So he showed me that. I think he did it properly when he was showing it to me. You know, he showed me how to save the hostages, but he also showed me how to go like crazy and just shoot everything in sight with the double Phantom. So that, yeah, I mean, I was definitely sucked in at that point. Then he fired up the multiplayer mode, and I played him in multiplayer. I think I specifically remember playing him in the stack, and I think sniper rifles was the weapon of choice there because Adrian really liked the sniper rifle, I remember, and he wanted to show that off to me. But I was terrible playing him. He destroyed me. I was really terrible at the game. I didn't know what I was doing, but at the same time, I really fell in love with the game. So I was blown away. Up until that point, the Nintendo 64 wasn't really on my radar. I had heard about it, and I was still kind of playing Super Nintendo quite a bit. I was into the Donkey Kong Country series, so Donkey Kong Country 1 through 3. I really liked those games and a few other games for the Super Nintendo, like Final Fight and Super Mario Kart. So the Nintendo 64 wasn't really on my radar at that point. But definitely after I saw, after I got the little preview of Bond at Adrian's house, Nintendo 64 suddenly was on my radar, and I really wanted to get a Nintendo 64. Flash forward maybe a few months later, it was maybe early February, January or February in 19, must have been 1998, the winter of 1998. I saw that Walmart was selling a Nintendo 64 for about $100. And that was a really good price. It was marked down from about, I don't know, I think they were selling for like $200 at first, but it didn't come with any games, but still, it was a really good price. And so I took all my paper route money. I was a paper boy at the time for the Patriot Ledger. If you're from the Boston area, you might know the Patriot Ledger. It was based out of Quincy. So I kind of ran the idea by my parents first. They said, I really want to buy this Nintendo 64. And they said, yeah, that's fine. It's your money. So do what you want with it. So I ended up buying the Nintendo 64 at Walmart for 100 buckaroos. And this was kind of a big deal because this was officially the first video game system that I bought with my own money. Previous game systems I had, like the Super Nintendo, as a Christmas present. It was actually one of my most favorite Christmas presents of all time. Just a little side note there. As far as the 8-bit Nintendo went, that just basically appeared in my house one day in the late 1980s. I think my brother may have bought it with his paper route money. He was actually a Patriot Ledger paper boy before I was, and also a Boston Globe paper boy for a short while as well. My dad may have paid for half of the Nintendo, but all I know is that I didn't pay for the Nintendo at all because I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. So the Nintendo 64 was the very first video game system that I bought with my own money, and I could officially call it my own. I was actually really proud of that. But again, the system didn't come with any games. But I think that same day, I don't think I got them at Walmart. I think I got them at KB Toys for some reason. I may have gotten them at Walmart, but that same day I ended up getting 2 video games for the Nintendo 64. One was Mario Kart 64, and the other, of course, you can guess, was Bond, of course. So I got those 2 games. I played Mario Kart here and there, quite a bit actually. But I especially played Bond, to no surprise. And I really, really quickly fell in love with the game. I played that damn mission again, with the silent PP7, and then you get the sniper rifle and take that first headshot. That really sucks you into the game right away. Then I played the facility and dropped through the vent and, started taking out all those guards in the various restroom stalls. And what immediately struck me, especially with the facility and that restroom level, was just how authentic it was. And it's actually not surprising. It's not surprising to learn that an actual architect was working on this game, like a real life architect named Carl Hilton was working on this game. And he designed a lot of the levels. I'm not sure if he designed all the levels, but he designed a lot of them. And so that's why the levels have such authenticity to them. But yeah, other than the facility, my favorite missions to play were the surface. Probably the train level was definitely a favorite of mine. Again, the frigate mission. And as far as the frigate mission, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Frigate. As far as that mission goes, you only really play it for real the first time or second time around, or maybe the third time to just properly play the mission. You save the hostages, and you do everything that you accomplish all the objectives that you're supposed to do. After you do all that, you kind of like just playing that level. I mean, that's always a go-to level if you need to blow off some stress or some steam, because you just play that level. Again, you get those double phantom guns and you go around blowing everything up in your path. You kind of just like mow down everything. You shoot everybody in your path, and you blow up all the computers in your path. It's a good level to play to blow off some stress. I think my least favorite missions were the jungle and the statue, because they gave me a lot of anxiety when I played them. And maybe the control room, that was another stressful one as well, especially if you play it on 00 Agent, which was the hardest level of difficulty to play the game on. But yeah, I definitely fell in love with playing Bond. And it was such an awesome game. And upon doing some research into the game, it really surprised me that the game came from very humble beginnings. It was actually developed by about 9 or 10 different game developers whose headquarters was in a farmhouse way out in the middle of the English countryside. That's where this Rareware team was located. And Nintendo didn't really have much expectations of this game at the time. They kind of gave the Rareware team a lot of freedom to develop it because they just thought it was going to be a game that would capitalize on the success of the 1995 film Goldeneye, the James Bond film. It was actually meant to be a game developed for the Super Nintendo at first, and it was going to be much like the game Virtua Cop, kind of a rail shooter game where you basically didn't have too much freedom to roam around. The game basically guided you where you needed to go. So maybe it was kind of like Lethal Enforcers in that sense as well. A lot of people have compared it to Star Fox, which you had very limited freedom in that game. The game kind of forced you to go in a certain direction. But once Nintendo 64 came out, the Rare team saw what was possible in the technology of the 3D system. So they thought GoldenEye would work a lot better on that system. So they scrapped the whole Super Nintendo version of the game and they started developing it for the Nintendo 64. And about 3 years later, they had a game on their hands. The game actually came out 2 years later than the GoldenEye movie in 1995. The game was released in August of 1997. Another fun fact is that the multiplayer mode wasn't even developed for the game until about 3 or 4 months before the game's release in April of 1997. So about 4 months before the game's released, the multiplayer mode was developed. It wasn't supposed to be in the game from the start. Nintendo never wanted it, or they never signed off on it. Actually, one of the game developers developed the multiplayer mode in secret. And Nintendo didn't really see the mode until right before the game was released. And they thought it was so good that they ended up keeping it in. But if it was pitched to them at the very beginning of the development process, Nintendo would have not been on board with the idea. They just wanted a mission game, I guess. But when they saw how cool and awesome multiplayer mode was, they kept it in the game. And it's just ironic that a lot of people just play Bond for the multiplayer mode. And it's just funny that that mode never would have existed had it not been for this one developer developing multiplayer mode in secret about 4 months before the game's release. So yeah, I definitely played the missions in GoldenEye quite a bit, but where I really excelled was with multiplayer mode, and that's what my friends and I played all the time, multiplayer mode, and we just played hours upon hours upon hours of multiplayer mode. We played a lot of different scenarios. We would play power weapons in various levels, usually the facility or the complex, the temple sometimes, the archives a lot, grenade launchers in the basement, rocket launchers in the stack. We would play that mode like all the time. Proximity mines was definitely a big scenario that we played quite a bit in the complex. I was never good at that. My friends were better at that mode than I was, but I was really good at rockets in the stack. I had really good aim with those rockets. So yeah, we played those scenarios quite a bit. But more than anything else, we played License to Kill with pistols. And License to Kill, if you don't know or remember, basically meant one shot from any weapon and you were dead. And usually we played License to Kill within 4 or 5 of the same levels, which was the basement, archives, facility, temple sometimes, bunker maybe sometimes. But that was basically it. We loved License to Kill. We would play that mode. I mean, if the game had nothing else but multiplayer mode, License to Kill, we would probably just play that and that only, and that would entertain us for hours upon hours upon hours. It was that's what really separated the men from the boys, is if you were good in License to Kill mode with pistols. And, you had to lean around corners, you had to know how to strafe, sometimes you would duck. Sometimes you would use the slapper, and if you were in a tight corner or something, you would have to use the slapper to get yourself out of the bind. Once in a while, we would play some, we would mix it up a bit and play Man with the Golden Gun, which was basically you try to find the golden gun in the level and one shot kills your opponent. The other one was The Living Daylights, which was basically capture the flag. You Only Live Twice was one. Yeah, that was when you only get 2 lives and then you're out of the game. So those were pretty fun as well, but we definitely played License to Kill more than anything else with pistols, and that kept us entertained for hours and hours. Trying to think of some other scenarios, throwing knives, grenades, sometimes timed mines were good. A lot of times you got really good weapons with like grenades or timed mines. I think you'd get, like the AR rifle. Sometimes we would lower the health bar or something like that, or play with no radar. There were a lot of different options. You could play with no radar or no sights. You could turn auto aiming off. And so that was a lot of fun to do from time to time. You could do paintball mode, all these different cheats you could do. DK mode and paintball mode were part of these cheats, and these cheats would open up when you played various missions in the game. So I definitely played Bond quite a bit. But eventually in 1998, there was a lot of buzz surrounding this new game that was coming out. And this new game was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And this game came out in November of 1998, I believe. Like I said, there was a ton of buzz. A lot of people at school were talking about it. I was like a sophomore or junior at the time in high school. So I was never big into role-playing games or, those big epic type games. I was more into Super Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong Country and games like that. But this game, Ocarina of Time, I heard such great things about it, that it was this awesome game, one of the best games ever made. So I put it on my Christmas list for the Christmas of 1998, and Santa Claus was nice to me, and he gave me the game for Christmas. So I started playing it at the beginning of my Christmas vacation from school, and I was definitely hooked pretty quickly. I definitely loved the game. It took me a while to beat all the temples and to figure everything out, because this was before the internet. Not that I would have looked everything up on the internet, but I didn't know what I was doing. So it really took me a long time to go from temple to temple and figure all the puzzles out. But it was a lot of fun. And, I went temple to temple. And by a certain point, probably by about the winter of the 1999, I guess, that next year, I got to the water temple. And oh boy, the water temple. Oh, it took so long for me to figure out that temple. And I mean, we're talking weeks upon weeks. And I just got stuck there at a certain point and I didn't know what to do. But miraculously, I did eventually figure out how to beat the water temple, how to get to the last boss, which was Morpha. And Morpha was actually incredibly easy compared to the rest of the temple. But yeah, that water temple was very stressful. So I did eventually beat the water temple and I got to the shadow temple. But by the time I got to the shadow temple, I was kind of traumatized by the water temple and I kind of just stopped playing the game. I didn't really want to go any further. The thought of starting a brand new temple kind of overwhelmed me at that point. So I kind of just quit the game. I became a quitter. I knew I had beaten most of the game by that point because the Shadow Temple is the second to last temple before you get to Ganon's castle, but I had gotten pretty far into the game, so I guess that was good enough for me. And like I said, I was traumatized by the Water Temple, so I definitely stopped playing the game. However, about 23 years later, or several years later, in the year 2020, just a few years ago, we were in the middle of COVID. I bought a Nintendo 3DS system, actually a Nintendo 2DS XL system. It was about $100 at Walmart, and it was right towards the beginning of COVID, so there weren't too many things to do. So I don't know, I kind of just had a hankering for video games. I wanted to play some sort of video game. So I got the new updated version of Ocarina of Time that they released on the for the Nintendo 3DS. And this is a much more beautiful version of the game. There's a lot of originalists out there who probably only want to play the Nintendo 64 version of Zelda. But I would argue that, I really like the Nintendo 3DS version. It's definitely a much more polished version. It looks much, much better. And it's actually a little easier to play because they give you some more clues. But yeah, in 2020, I started playing the game again on the 3DS. I didn't really remember much of the game, so I was basically starting from scratch again, and I had to play all the puzzles and the temples as though I never played the game before because I didn't remember anything. I may have remembered a few things, but I hardly remembered anything. I got up to the water temple again this time. I beat it a little more easily because they give you another clue or two. So I was able to beat the water temple pretty easy this time. And then I got to the shadow temple, and that was completely uncharted territory for me this time because I hadn't played any of the game beyond that back, 20 however many years ago, back in 1998. So the Shadow Temple actually wasn't very difficult. Bongo Bongo, the last boss in the Shadow Temple, was actually really difficult to beat. It took me several tries. He gave me a really tough time. But then I eventually realized that there was kind of a system to beating him, and he actually became easier to beat after I figured out that system. I won't tell you that system because it's kind of a spoiler, I guess, but Bongo Bongo was hard, yes. And then the Spirit Temple, that wasn't too hard. So I was able to beat that without too much of a hassle. Then I eventually got to Ganondorf's castle. I was able to beat Ganondorf actually pretty easily. However, I didn't realize that Ganondorf turned into Ganon at the end. And Ganon gave me a hell of a time. He actually destroyed me the first time I played him. So it took me about 4 or 5 times to beat Ganon, and I was really awkward in beating him at first. And finally, by the last try, I actually ran out of light arrows at the end of it. So I thought I was doomed. I thought I was done for, that he was going to beat me again. But then I actually tried throwing Deku nuts at him, and that stunned him for a couple of seconds. And I was actually able to stun him long enough to slice at his tail and then eventually beat him. So it was kind of poetic that, the Deku nuts you always think are kind of like the least helpful weapon that you have in that game, but it was kind of poetic that I beat Ganon with those simple Deku nuts. Now I can actually beat him much more easily. I know how to kind of roll through between his legs and then slice at the tail, and I can beat him like it's nothing now. So yeah, I had a great time playing Ocarina of Time, 20 some odd years later. But this time around, I really did appreciate the game much more than I did back in 1998. Probably because I'm older now and I'm into media creation, and I have a somewhat better understanding of how much work and time it must have taken to make such a masterpiece of a video game. You appreciate all the small details in the game and also how much time it must have taken to develop all the puzzles. I really love how doing all the puzzles in the game is almost like exploring the minds of the game's developers because, it was their minds that gave birth to such amazing puzzles. So playing the game is also almost like reverse engineering the minds of the developers. Getting back to the Nintendo 64, after playing Ocarina of Time for a while, I definitely still played Bond a lot and still played Mario Kart 64 a lot. There were a couple other games that I played on the Nintendo 64, like Super Mario Brothers 64. I definitely played that a lot, but I didn't get too heavy into that game. I don't know, for some reason it didn't really catch on for me. And another game that comes to mind is Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I played that game quite a bit as well. And then Donkey Kong 64. I sort of got into that game, but I never got too heavy into that game either. I mostly just played Mario Kart 64 and Bond and Ocarina of Time. That is until the year 2000 when I got word that there was another video game coming out that was supposed to be an unofficial sequel to Goldeneye Bond. And that game, as you probably know, was Perfect Dark. I was actually really excited about Perfect Dark, so I ended up getting Perfect Dark. I think it was the summer of 2000, right at the beginning of the summer. And I played Perfect Dark quite a bit. I played all the missions, and I really liked the cyberpunk vibe of the game and how it felt like one of my favorite movies of all time, Blade Runner. Especially at the very beginning of the first mission where you see the dark cityscape, the acid rain, the giant digital billboards and the flying cars. And then the music you hear is very Blade Runner-esque as well. With my friends, I would definitely play a lot of the Perfect Dark multiplayer mode. But ironically, whenever we played multiplayer for Perfect Dark, we always played the classic Bond levels. I think the classic Bond levels opened up if you beat a certain amount of missions in the game or something like that. So we'd always play the classic Bond levels, and usually very simple weapons too, like pistols or something. All the other levels and all the other new weapons were a little too complicated for us. The cool thing about multiplayer mode in that game is you could add the sims to it. So you could add like easy sims and hard sims and perfect sims. And that was kind of interesting throwing those into the mix. They were simulated characters, so they were the computer basically. And you could put a ton of guys in there. You could have, I forget how many, but several sims you could put into the game. So you could play against three other people, three of your friends, but you could also put in the simulated characters. So you'd have like maybe up to 10 or 12 different people, trying to shoot each other. So it got a little messy. It actually got a little slow. The computer got slow when you put a lot of sims into the game with you. But that kind of made things interesting. Eventually, though, we just went back to the original Bond and played multiplayer on the original Goldeneye 64. And for the next few years, that's mostly all I played. If I played Nintendo 64 at all, it was with my friends, and we were playing multiplayer mode on the original Bond. Then eventually by 2003, I was introduced to the system PlayStation 2, and I saw the game Grand Theft Auto 3, and that game really blew me away. So I definitely strayed from Nintendo for a while and played Grand Theft Auto 3. I got a PlayStation 2, I think, in the year 2003, so I played that a lot. Didn't play Nintendo 64 as much, sadly. But yeah, PlayStation 2 isn't that great of a system, and I eventually went back to playing more Nintendo. So in hindsight, the Nintendo 64 really isn't that great of a system. When you play it today, it really dates itself. The graphics are really terrible. I think everybody was kind of blown away by the 3D aspect of it back in the mid-1990s because they weren't used to 3D games at that time. So even though the graphics were all polygonal, they definitely liked the 3D aspect to it, and that was really cool. But today, when you play Nintendo 64, it's really tough on your eyes, and it looks really bad. I mean, let's face it, it looks bad. And this is in contrast to, say, playing Nintendo, the 8-bit Nintendo system or Super Nintendo. I can play those two systems today, and they still really hold up really nice. The graphics look very nice these days. Like if you play the Legend of Zelda on 8-bit Nintendo, I think that really, really looks pretty nice today. Obviously, it's 8-bit graphics, but it's pretty easy on the eyes, and it looks good. The Nintendo 64, though, it looks really bad. I would, when it comes to Ocarina of Time, I'd much rather play that game on the Nintendo 3DS because it really looks terrible on the Nintendo 64. Yeah, it's just really weird that a system that blew your mind away in the mid-1990s, you thought looked so awesome in the 1990s, looks so terrible today. It's just weird how times change and your brain literally changes. The graphics look so good then, and today they look so bad. So it's just weird how your brain changes over time. However, back in the mid-1990s, it was a very special system, and I love the Nintendo 64 to death. And it's always going to have a place in my heart. It's a system that's very special to me. All right, so thank you very much for listening to that episode of the Burnzo Cast. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did enjoy this episode, I have a couple articles on my website, theburnzodiaries.com, that you might like. I have one article that's completely devoted to Bond, aka Goldeneye 007. And that article is called Proxos in the Plex, a Goldeneye 007 retrospective, or something like that. You can find it on my website, theburnzodiaries.com, or you can Google Matt Burns and then Proxos in the Plex, a Goldeneye 007 retrospective. And then there's another article of mine that's completely devoted to The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and that is called 100 Days of Zelda. That's basically about my experience playing Zelda again in the year 2020 after having played it back in 1998. So I think you'll really enjoy that as well. And if you're into video games or if you're a gamer, I do have a couple other articles that you might like. One is called I Used to Be a Gamer, the 8-bit Nintendo Years. So that's about my experience playing 8-bit Nintendo when I was a kid. That's on my website, theburnzodiaries.com. It's also available as a Kindle single on amazon.com. So you can get it as an ebook as well. And then I have one more. It's called I Dream of Dream Machine. That's also on my website and also available as a Kindle single on amazon.com. I Dream of Dream Machine is about my favorite video arcade from my childhood called Dream Machine. And a lot of you may be familiar with Dream Machine. I think it was in a lot of shopping malls and in various places. I think it was a chain during the 1980s and 1990s, and it actually still exists today. All right, I think that's it. So stay tuned for more episodes of the Burnzo Cast. And hey, buddy, do me a flavor. Do me a flavor and just be well, okay? Okay, see ya. Hey everyone, if you want to check out my writing, be sure to check out my blog, theburnzodiaries.com, and also check out my books at amazon.com. I have many novels there, including Johnny Cruise, Supermarket Zombies, Weird Monster, The Woman and the Dragon, and I also have many Kindle singles there and other books, including memoirs. So be sure to check out my blog, theburnzodiaries.com, and also my books at amazon.com.